Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited. I want to thank the Historical Society and everything for the invite. I hope it goes well. More? Is that good? You do a lot more? No, but what if I turn it up a little? Is that any better? Oh, okay. Well, thanks again for coming. I'll start out with a little bit of information on Bod and the family starting. Bod started packing commercially in about 1922. We don't know for sure if it was 1, 2, 3. The best we can get is about 22. We know when he was a young man, he came to the mountains packing and working on cattle. Then he went and did many things. Quite a versatile man. Made quite an impression on my life along with everybody else's. Where are we at? Is that the first picture? I thought the other one was the first one. Anyway, that's a good picture of Bob. You can see he's got a cross-cut saw and an axe. He was a logger and everything else, along with working in the oil fields and down in Long Beach. And anyway, we'll get started. Bob started out, I don't know who he bought out to start with, but then he did go in partners with an Atkins for a while, for about 2 years, and he retired and bought him out. About 1930, he bought out the Lake Motel with about 45 head of stock, so Bob was running quite a bit of stock at that time. My dad and Uncle Shorty worked for him for years before the war and after the war. I think Uncle Shorty went to work for Bob in about 25. Let's go to the next one. Oh, you already did. You switched. Don't switch on me. This is a picture of a couple that came up and went on a pack trip on their honeymoon in 1941. Yeah, for Bob. And
At Huntington Lake.
yes. Why don't you come help me? Anyway, Bob had a very interesting. Because of the times at that time, there was probably in the packing industry about 3 times as many outfits as there is today. Because Bob was stationed at Huntington Lake, his main camp was at Huntington, and he had a spike camp at Sample Meadow, which they had to ride over Kaiser Pass and over the ridge to drop in there and then pack people into the backcountry. The Forest Service was not giving a full permit on the other side of Kaiser Ridge. So a lot of the packers had to travel 40 miles a day just to take a party in. They'd deadhead from Huntington and go over, meet the party at Sample Meadow, pack them up and take them to Margaret Lake. Spend the night, reverse the same process, ride another 40 miles out. It was hard on men and stock, but it was done. It was a lot harder than they are today. I don't know how I can say it. But,
You can't hear you again, John.
well, I'll try some more here then.
Okay.
He also bought out Edison Company. When Edison Company decided to get rid of all their pack stock, which they did a lot of their own packing at the time, and he bought 35 head of stock from them and all their equipment. And that was put him up again. And then they moved to the present site of D&F Pack Station, which is where they were at up until 46. He was involved in a lot of stuff. I know him and Dad were in a movie, I think in 1925 or so. I couldn't find much information on that. They furnished stock, and I think they did some guard duty at night on the set. I think it was White Fang, but I'm not sure that said I looked. Part of my information was coming from the family and then from the library at Fresno State, and that closed down, and I lost that source, so I didn't get a lot of the information I was hoping to get. In 46, oh yeah, we got that chance. There's one about in front of the lake shore. I think that fishing was pretty good, I'm not sure. I don't know if they had the license or not. No one bought it. He was an avid fisherman, avid hunter, loved to fish and hunt. Bod was quite the character. During the Depression, he had a hard time making it. In fact, the Depression put a lot of cat outfits out of business. Bod kind of stayed in business because there were people coming to the mountain, just kind of like what's going on right now. They're tired of the valley. They don't have any money. They have their went to the mountains to get away. They couldn't afford anything, but Vaughn would take people on pack trips and say, send me the money when you got it. And he was receiving money for quite a while afterward. That was the type of character that he was. And he worked, after he retired, and so he came and helped my dad and myself with our place quite a bit. Rode around, took care of a bunch of stuff. So I mean, he was quite an influence. A lot of the family had, they named a lot of lakes. I think there's George Lake and Bill Lake, Hammond Lake, Cunningham Lake, and then Corbett Lake. We all know Corbett Lake, and I'm sure most of you know who Corbett was, a fighter. And how it got its leg, they were training for a prize fight at Huntington Lake. And they took him on a fishing trip, and the sheriff at that time said, well, when you go to take him, make him have a good ride. Show him how good a shape he is in the end. And he did. They put him on a horse, and Bob slapped the horse on the butt, and the horse trotted all the way in. And he got off and sweat the whole time everybody else was fishing. So you can kind of get the idea of that. I don't know if any of you know Bill DeCarteret, who's another pack station operator down south. Bill worked for Vaughn for 1 year. And that's how he got started packing, was with Vaughn. And then he went, when Vaughn sold in '46 to DNF, he worked for DNF for a little bit, packing for them. But in the mid-50s, I think Bill bought a place down south. And he's written a book. There's a lot of Vaughn's mentioned in that several times too. It's a pretty good book. I don't know, that's about it. Get started here, I don't know. Then Dad, like I said, Dad and Uncle Shorty worked for Vaughn before and after the war, and Vaughn sold in '46. They went to work for Stevenson. They packing, and they worked there for a year. Then in '48, they bought Stevenson out. They went in partnerships and bought Stevenson out at Mono Hot Springs. They ran the outfit. They were partners there until '68. Yes.
Just wondering who we're looking at in the pictures. Oh, we just switched it.
Oh. Well, the one on the right is my dad, Tom. The middle is Uncle Shorty, and that's me at about 10 years old. Or 6 years. I always told my dad and everybody that they're the ones that had a choice. They bought into the business. I didn't stand a chance. I was born and raised in it. Anyway, down to Mono, they, where was that at? Where we at? Yeah. What's the next? That's Uncle Shorty on the left, and Dad on the right. Uncle Shorty's riding a horse called Pink. Dad riding his horse Honey. More than likely, the lead mule with Uncle Shorty is called Sally. That was his favorite lead mule. He led her everywhere. She's a big mule. I don't know how he packed her. He was short and couldn't hardly reach the top of her. Somewhere at home, I have a picture of him standing on a bucket loading her. A lot of the stuff they did at the time that they were in business was a lot of construction work for the Forest Service. There was a lot of trail work being done, a lot of bridges being built, besides a lot of just packing. The heydays of the packing was in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they were busy. They ran 120 head of stock with a crew of 7 and plus help on weekends when they could. And they went, of course, a lot of the stuff at that time, about half the people or better that went were livestock people and could handle the stock themselves, so they sent a lot of stock out without packers. So, and that changed as times changed because nobody knew how to, everybody moved into town and got away from that, didn't know how to handle the stuff. And some of the stuff they did was pretty amazing. I don't remember. Yeah, this is a cable, the Cassidy Crossing Bridge on the San Joaquin River. This cable is like about this big around. I mean, it's humongous. It's a car bridge that was torn down, and the Forest Service got the bridge and decided to pack it into Cassidy to cross the river. The cable was supposed to be half the length that it is, but I think it was twice, and I wish I knew what the length was of the bridge, but it was, they started out, they weren't sure how they were gonna pack it. They looped it and started out, they had too many mules to start with, so they started dropping mules off because they couldn't turn, and it was too tight and too heavy, but it was really a heavy load. That's Uncle Shorty. I think there's one more of the bridge.
Oh, yeah.
That's them going up a slight incline. They had extra people there pulling it up to help the mules carry it up. It was so heavy and so big. It's massive. I was about 10 years old, and I got accused that I wasn't even a good enough cook to open a can of potatoes. No, I didn't want to change it yet. Go back. The fellow in the lead, on the horse in the lead, is Lynn Van Vliet, from the Van Vliet family. He was up helping. And then Uncle Shorty, and then George Cochran was the fellow that worked for us. George is the one who accused me and told me I couldn't cook a potato. So okay, now you can change it. The cable, you can get an idea how big it is right there in a man's hand. It was so stiffened, it had to drop down into the river that you couldn't pack it down. And we packed it to the top of the river, and they tied ropes to it and snaked it. Had 3 or 4 guys holding the end of it up and snaked it down the hill to the bridge to get it down there because it was just too heavy and too dangerous to try to pack it. But that's okay. That's a picture of the bridge. They flew the steel in. We packed all the cable in that, but they flew the steel in. This is jumped way ahead. We're about, let's see, we're up in 91 years of flood. 97. The heavy year of 97 when we had the flood, it flooded the rivers real bad. They did some damage to the bridge, and we packed down in there to do repair work. And this next one, please. That's a tree. The water backed up in the gorge and created a dam. And this tree came down and slammed into the bridge, and then the dam must have broken and let the water out, and the force just bent the bridge, and it popped a lot of suspension cable, and you can see it's got a pretty good kink in it.
Where is this bridge?
That's Cassidy Crossing on the San Joaquin, between going out through Onion Springs and coming out over the Minaret's back station over that way. We packed in the fall. Let's see. We took them in the fall, packed in so they could stabilize it, and then the next year they went in and fixed it. And then we took, Eric, didn't we take a crew in and they blew that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back them in the rattlesnake and they forced the tree, augered a hole in that tree and blasted the tree out.
They didn't want to cut it. They thought it was too dangerous because they didn't know what would happen if they cut the tree, if the bridge would last or not. So they blew it out. That was pretty. It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Then we had, okay, next. So that's Henry Davis and myself standing on the bridge. Well, you didn't have to jump up and down. It would start swinging pretty good on the top when you walk across. Okay. This picture's kind of out of sequence. Go up one more, and then we'll back up to that. This is a rescue that was done in the mid-60s from a fellow by the name of Baldwin. Had the Pitkin shovel mine back by Grassy Lake. And he was following a tree and it fell on him and broke his hip. This was before they could do any rescues with helicopters in the high country, and they had to pack them out. I don't know. Some of you probably know what a Stokes litter is, and some don't. Stokes litter is a device that's on top of the mule, and they put you in there and strap you in, and it's got to be a double E ticket ride. I'm telling you, I never want to be there. But this is looking down, coming over Goodale Pass, an 11,000 foot pass. That's Lake of the Lone Indian in the background. That's my dad on the horse. That's Uncle Shorty leading the mule. The fellow that's walking up the rocks right here was Glenn Burns, another packer from the outfit, and he also had to do with the mine back there. And the two, I'm not sure about the two people that are other walking, but one of them is a nurse from Edison Company. Edison company sent a nurse back in and they were able to administer morphine to kill him with the pain so he could make it, because I don't think he'd have made it anyway. Just the right alone. But that, I don't know if any of you are familiar with video, but that's a rough pass, and that was very, very, very dangerous and a very. Now this kind of explains when it was and what happened, what I've just gone over, but this is written on the back. And the picture was taken by Arn Snyder. Arn Snyder was a district ranger for the High Sierra Ranger Station for years and years and years. He was an avid photographer. He's had a lot of good photographs around. Every now and then you can run across a few of them that are back. Okay. This is in McClure Meadow. My dad's leading the mule in the front, and that's me in the back, and we're bringing out 2 frameworks and 2 helicopters that crashed in Evolution Valley. That was in the first chopper crashed, and the pilot and everybody survived, and the hydrographers managed to make it out okay. And then the second chopper was flying the first chopper out, hit an air pocket, and crashed, and this one killed the pilot. So they decided to pack it out. And this was a 4th of July weekend. I remember that because we got a flare from the helicopter and set it off in Evolution Meadow for fireworks. So anyway. Weren't supposed to, but we did. But that was years ago, several years ago. Edison Company was Forest Service, and the Edison Company was thinking about getting rid of their cabins. The snow survey cabin, and the Forest Service wanted to get rid of the helicopters. And there was a big debate going on, and I told her, I said, you don't want to get rid of the cabins? Because this is what happened, and they didn't know what I was talking about because it's been so long. So I brought them a piece. I delivered a piece of the helicopter to the office in Big Creek, and the pilot, the helicopter pilot, knew exactly what the piece was, and he said he didn't want anything to do with it. It was bad luck. They also did a lot of big trips back then. This is a camp in first recess. It's 150 people in this group of Sierra Clubbers. You packed stoves and a full kitchen crew. It was very common at the time, anywhere from 200 to 150 people. You would have strings of mule going constantly with resupply. They didn't have the freeze-dried foods and the dried food we have today, so you're packing fresh produce all the time. Fresh heads of lettuce and tomatoes and watermelons, everything. This particular trip went in about 1952 or 53 to second recess, and that was at the time that they were building Edison Lake during the construction. And they were having to take the people through the construction site while they were building the dam, while Bechtel was building the dam to the upper end of the lake. We had corrals that we packed them out of there. And I say we in general because I'm talking about Dad, not for short, he done me, I was too young. But that was quite interesting times at the time, shoveling the people through with the big construction equipment. But it was done, I think there was like, I don't know how many loads. All I know is my mom and Dad talked about, they'd bring truckloads of food and it was just going constantly, going all the time. So let's see what we do. This is Mirror Cabin. This is inside the park. It's kind of a neat spot just because it's unusual. It sits up on top of Mirror Pass. It was built by the Forest Service, but it was built by a local man out of North Fork by the name of Mike Wentz. He lived in North Fork, and he had trouble building this because nobody would stay there with him. It's in the middle it's up high. There's nothing there, there's no trees, you can't camp there, there's no water, the wind blows, it's cold, and that's why they built the cabin, because you could get caught up there in a snowstorm, and if you were hiking or one thing or another, and die. So it's built, and it's stair step. There's no framework. This is just purely rock. There's no framework. There's a fireplace on the inside. There's some beds, flat spots for beds and chairs. It's really a cool spot. But and they packed all the cement and everything up there for that. That was before it became Kings Canyon National Park. Okay. This is the pack station in Mono Hot Springs. This is one picture that we had, trying to find some, none of this exists anymore. The 2 trees are gone, one was lightning struck and they cut it down, and the other one is logged out. The crows are in the background. It's probably taken about 59 or 60, as you can see the nose of the 58 2-ton truck. There's a stock truck sitting inside there. In 63, the main cabin burnt down at Mono Hot Springs. We had an office, living quarters for Dad and Uncle Shorty and my grandfather. And us kids slept upstairs in the 2nd story. My cousin Phil and I happened to be on a trip in Evolution Valley, and we got back, the pack station was gone, along with all my freshman year clothes. Fall of the year school was supposed to start the next week, and so we would go find new clothes. New pair of boots. And then my other cousin Craig, who I see is here tonight, we spent, I don't know, a week, 10 days hauling nothing but ashes and trash. With truckloads of burnt station to the dump, the old dump above. It was a mess, but we got the pleasure of doing that. Nobody else did, so. Let's see here, we've gone, we're beyond this. No, we're not there. A lot of the stuff they also did is they packed, Uncle Shorty and them packed a sportsman club out of Fresno, packed a lot of golden trout and trout all over the Sierras to plant the golden trout up Bear Creek, Hawkins, Hooper, everywhere. It was done a lot, and plant a lot of the fish, which now some of them are being taken out because of other regulations and everything. But that was part of the stuff they've done. The cabin at Florence. We used to have the pack station at Forest Lake, and the wife and I just recently sold it to the Near Trail Ranch, that division of our business. We wanted to downsize a little bit. But the cabin at Florence, they tore it down. They purchased from the Edison Company, and they tore it down and moved it from Camp 62 and rebuilt it at Florence. And it was a foreman's cabin for Camp 62 construction crew. And so it's got a little bit of history there. Besides, it's had another life. Let's see, what else do we have? Let's see. I don't know what yeah, I guess that's it. Oh, well, yeah, that's it. There's a picture of my dad and myself. We went in partners in 1968. Uncle Shorty wanted to retire, so I bought his half of the business out. We also bought a cow permit the same year from Lester Disick. We bought the China Camp permit, and then we ran cows for about 10 years until the drought in the 70s hit. And the horses and the pack station was making more money than the cattle business, so we sold the cows. Got out of the cattle business. But Vaughn was up there and helped us a bunch with that. He rode a lot. He knew that lower country, and he had stories that you couldn't believe or wish you could remember them. In that part of the country. But, we started in 69, 68, actually in 67. The pack station that Dad and Uncle Shorty had was a temporary site at Edison Lake. It was a parking lot of the DVR resort right now. And we were the temporary site from 53 until 72. In 68, we finally got a permanent site, started building, built corral, put in a water system, and moved the building. It was a hospital building from the Edison Company construction site from Becker Corporation. It was a hospital. We moved it up there in 68. In the winter of 68, 69 came along and flattened it. We never really got to use it. And then they decided, well, this is a bad spot for a pack station, you need to move again. So we started all over and moved to our present site, which is up the road about a mile. And at that point we built, so when Uncle Shorty retired, we went into a major construction part. We built several buildings, 3 major buildings, a couple of smaller buildings, and we moved a lot of buildings on. A lot of the buildings that they built up until that time were no more than 12 feet wide, so that we could load it on a truck and haul it up the hill. And we moved like about 8 buildings from Mono up. A couple of the buildings we moved was the old bathhouse at Mono Hot Springs that they tore down and getting rid of, so we got those and we moved those. Ones that you can tell which ones they are because of the old log buildings. What we call our cook's cabin, that's where our cook lives. We got our wash house and the outhouse. And so those are all come from Mono Hot Springs from the old, and those were built, I believe, in the 30s when the Forest Service got the money to do that, to kind of establish that. Maybe it was a little bit later. This is the Florence Lake Pack Station. The corral's getting ready to catch up and go on a trip up into Evolution. We did a lot of trips into Evolution Valley, and the park was really, really good. I don't know if any of you remember, if you're from up around here, you probably remember the drives that we used to have. We used to take a 3-day drive and drive our livestock from North Fork up through Jose Basin, spend the night at Dawn, and the next day we'd leave Dawn and go to Huntington Lake, come through Big Creek down the highway. It was always fun getting through the cattle guard at Big Creek because they had a walk-through gate. It was wide enough for a person to walk through, and you had to drive a herd of horses through. 125 horses through that gate to keep them out of the cattle guard. We did that, and then we spend the night at DNF Pack Station, and then the next day we would take them over the top and go to Mono Hot Springs, and then from there we'd divert, either go to Edison or go to Florence with them, or keep them there. And we did that in reverse in the fall of the year. It was always an exciting time. Sometimes if it was an early enough year when you went around Huntington Lake, some of the girls were still swimming and the water wasn't too cold, so you always tried to show off for them. It's just before I met my wife. This is my cousin Phil. This is a mule called Jackie. She is really a neat mule. She was a good pack mule, but she hated you. She did not like to be shod, which wasn't uncommon. In the days earlier when Dad and Uncle Shorty and the early packers, mules were not pampered. They were, unless they were special mules, but basically they were handled, packed, and that was it. They were considered to be, well, most people that deal with mules know that they're not dumb. They're just considered to be mean and honored, and that's because of their self-preservation is very strong. They understand that they don't want to get hurt, and if they don't like something, they're not going to do it. And that's where they get the stubbornness. Actually, they have more common sense and horse sense than a horse does. They get that from their mother and then the cautiousness from their dad. So, it's always, sometimes it's good to be half-assed, you know. There are a lot of good memories. There wasn't, as far as Forest Service goes, with construction of the Forest Service in the backcountry, there wasn't a lot going on. They were starting to lose their money, funding or one thing or another. They were doing all of their own. The biggest thing that affected the 60s and the 70s was the Kelty Pack and freeze-dried food. The Kelty Pack came along and made backpacking a simple, easy thing. Before that, it was the old Boy Scout backpack, which were miserable, and the Army backpack, which was miserable. So a lot of people didn't backpack a lot. But in the 60s and 70s, that became very, very prominent, and it became very easy, and it became very, very competitive between the backpackers and the commercials, or just livestock in general. By the time 70s and that were over, we were outnumbered probably 8-1. And they didn't like the manure on the trail, and we didn't like to see their little white roses stuck under every rock. So it's kind of a conflict. We can learn to get along, and it does, but it has affected the packing industry a lot as far as that goes. Here we are. After the shoeing, we had to roach them. I gave them a haircut because they looked kind of shabby after the winter time. When you roach them, you give them a hair. You roach their manes. If it's a young mule, you leave the top notch on so you know it was a young mule that you were dealing with. without catching stock in the dark, which you couldn't tell very good. And then your tail, you bailed the tails. You bailed it, by belling the tail, you always cut the bottom off and you shave the top part, but in between you would bell the hair. And that determined how mean the mule was or how gentle the mule was. You could look at the bell on the tail and see if it was a mean mule you're walking behind and get kicked, or it was okay to wait up close and walk by. It's kind of a signature of the times, and that most everybody did that. That happens to be at our corrals at Edison, where we was located. A lot of the mules that Dad and Uncle Shorty had, another reason that they were mean is if somebody, it seemed to me that if somebody had a mule that they didn't like or didn't want or was too mean, they bought it. I never knew who would come out ahead in the trade, but I always figured we didn't come out very good because we all had and then we raised a lot of mules. We raised a lot of our own. They were a little harder to find. The market wasn't really available for mules, so we raised a lot of our own, and can understand why they were a little bothered at that time, because you raised them. The first time they saw a human is when you met them. You took them away from the mother to wean them. Next time they saw you was when you branded them, you cut them. And the next time they saw them, you saddled them. The way you went, so you always had a battle there. Later on in years, we started changing that a little bit, where you pampered them a little bit, and it made a big difference. It didn't cost near as much in cut kicks and bites and nothing like that. So, next please. That kind of takes care of with Dad. Well, there's one thing that did happen back in the 60s that I didn't mention. I mean, earlier when Dad and I were partners. In about 69 or 70, I met this blonde girl in the campground in Ohio. About 4 years later or so, I married her. So that was pretty important in my life. And that was a very important deed that happened in the 60s when I was partnering with my dad. So now we can go to this point. This is my wife Janice and I at the pack station at Edison. We took over in 1980. My dad decided to retire. He wanted to retire. We took over, and by this time, also our usage from when Dad and Uncle Shorty were in business was 120 head of stock. We're down to 85 head of stock now that we're allowed to have on the trailer at the time. We were still running about 100 head, but that was the other 15 to 20 head that was above the 85 was allowed on a permit. Was for the sick, the lame, and the lazy, that were hurt or whatever that you could trade out, which dropped the size. Also during that period of time, I meant to mention, we also dropped party size from 25 people to 15, which is an okay thing, other than it eliminated all the youth groups. We used to pack a lot of Boy Scouts, a lot of YMCAs, a lot of Girl Scouts, a lot of church groups. And when it dropped from 25 people to 15 people to a party size, it was uneconomical for the youth groups to go. And so you lost a lot of people who were going to the mountain anymore that can't go, and lost that. You know, it didn't teach them about the mountains to go. So that was bad. That was a bad thing. I think it could have been dealt with a little different. Anyway, on with this. Next page. There's that. This is a load of hay. I'm not sure if some of you ever came up to Edison. It's quite a bit down the road. One thing about it, I know you backed up for me because I couldn't back. That's the grade out of Mono Hot Springs coming up. It's a 65-foot truck and trailer loaded with 20 ton of hay. It became feasible to do that. Dad and Uncle Shorty and them used to haul it on a 2-ton truck and a 1-ton truck, and we hauled hay all summer long, and I got tired of that. So I was able to buy a bigger truck and went into it. And the first time I had the truck was no problem. Actually, this is the second truck I've owned. The first truck we bought was a 56 Diamond T we bought from Len Denver when he sold out his cattle truck business. And I learned to drive on it. Then we went to this bigger truck. And the first time I pulled the trailer, I stopped at the point. The bought a pack of cigarettes and 2 6-packs of beer, and we started over the hill. And I made it with a trailer. So it took away my better judgment and settled my nerves. So we did it. But we did it at night, so it was nobody was on the road. We did it. There has been a few occasions when I did drop a load of hay off. Unfortunately, it walks off on that road. There's nothing you can do about it. Once it starts walking, you cannot stop it. You just let it go. You just keep going until it falls off or whatever, and then pick up the pieces later. I have got into Edison with the trailer and a bale of hay hanging over the side that far and still had it on there, and felt lucky I made it. And if I ran you off the road, I'm sorry. Okay. This is a bridge that we packed into Paiute Branch into the park. The park, and actually it's a portion we packed for them. They started the construction. Actually, they did a film on building the hands-free and machine-free type construction of this bridge, and it was running behind, and they got a hold of us, and we finished packing it in, and that's about the last bridge. Well, this one was replacing the bridge. There were several bridges built in the late the middle 60s that were called Bailey bridges, and they lasted till you got the first heavy winter, 68, 69, and a lot of them bent and went down, and they had to be repaired, and construction was done on those, and this happens to be the replacement bridge for that bridge that went down. The Ross family used to go up every fall to Paiute and stick sticks. They had logs that they would stick under the bridge, the old bridge, to hold it so the snow wouldn't finish knocking it down, and they had a cable to the bridge so the high water knocked the logs out, but they didn't float away, so they didn't have to lift the logs out. That went on for years until they built this one. And it had a nice little kink in it also. Those are the decking that we were packing in. That's from the headwaters. They boated the material across Florence, and then we packed it from the headwaters of Florence and up to Paiute. We also used the Ross family's corrals. They were kind enough to let us use the corrals to keep our stock in while we were doing it. One thing about the packing industry is probably the families that are still in it and have been in it. We've all been good friends and family, and everybody gets along good and helps each other out immensely. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be making it in business today. Okay. This is in 1956. This is a picture of a map from the West Side Packers Association. There's 19 pack stations on there that are listed from about Sonora down to the Kern. Today, there's 13. Some of those have gone out of business. Some have consolidated. But I thought this would be kind of interesting to show. There's another one that shows. Is that it? Okay. Just to kind of to go along with that, how the business has changed somewhat. When the Forest Service went into business, there were 71 commercial outfits in the Sierras. Now there's 30. Commercial stock that was being used was probably about 2,800 head of stock. It's down to about 14 right now. That's both sides of the Sierras. It dropped immensely. A lot of it, like I said, due to party size, I believe, part of it. And of course, a lot of lawsuits, environmental lawsuits against packing the livestock in the mountains has changed us immensely. Which is hurt a lot of business and put a lot of the businesses out. It's not the bigger companies and outfits are the ones that are still in business and able to hold in. The east side has approximately about the same number as we have on the west side, and they're condensing. They've condensed greatly. There's probably 3 major pack stations over there. Three of those outfits are going now, and they're down in size. We're down in size we are down to about 60 head of stock now from 85 that we used to have into the business and regulations. Well, there are just some points of interest, whatever. There's many, many stories that I can tell. If somebody reminds me of a story, I can remember it, but trying to come up with it is, yes.
And Selleck said he'd like you to tell the story about his father and you with the bear.
Which there,
A bear? Which bear? Bear.
I'm trying to remember which, called it.
Oh, he should have been there, okay.
The only bear story I can think of offhand is one with my dad. Is that the one he's talking about?
Oh, maybe it's with your dad, yes. Uh-huh. In the mess hall or something?
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I wasn't gonna bring that up. The park did us a lot of good favors in years past. They used to fly the bear, patrol the bears into out towards Onion Springs and drop them off. That became a Forest Service problem then instead of a Park Service problem. And we had several bears break into the pack station and would come in and rob the camp and one thing and another. And one broke, actually several broke in. The one broke in and been coming in quite a bit. And my dad went out and tried to chase it off and didn't chase off, and it charged him and shot it. And wounded it, and then it took off, and the dogs, the cow dog, being cow dogs, got ahead of it, turned it around and brought it back. Fortunately, unfortunately, it hit my dad, but it did knock him down. He threw his arm up and chewed his arm up a little bit. But I think probably one of the fastest trips made from Edison Lake to hospital was made by Fred Miller, who was an owner of Vermilion Valley Resort and a highway patrolman at the time. They loaded him up in a station wagon and drove him down there, and they got him to the hospital in Fresno faster than I could get from North Fork to the hospital. But everything turned out good. And I don't know if that's the story he was talking about or not. Yeah.
I'll mention it to him.
Yeah. And then one of them bear stories, we had one break-in. We had one break-in the winter that I got the spring that I got married. My wife and I got married. We left and went on our honeymoon. And my dad calls me up on our honeymoon and says, "Hey, you got to come home and clean the pack station." I said, "No, Dad, I'm on my honeymoon. I'm not leaving. We're not leaving Arizona to come home and clean up after the dinner." Yeah, he'd spent quite a bit of time. We still have a few mementos that he chewed up at the time. I don't know. Anybody got any other questions, or is there a Wi-Fi? Well, that's Cunningham Lake. Needless to say, we had to show a picture of that. That's up by Corbett Lake, which I told you. It's the next lake, next drainage over from Corbett. And it was very common at that time. A lot of the trail systems weren't in. It was really, really common for a packer to take and plant fish in the lake and not tell anybody that he planted it, and then pack his parties only to the lake. Not really develop a trail because they didn't want their competitors to know that there was fishing and protect their people there. Cunningham happened to be one, Corbett was one, and so there wasn't trails to a lot of these lakes that they named and planted fish in. It was real common at the time. They were more competitive at the time. This is our corrals at Edison. This is our mule catch corral in the front, and then our mangers. This is our crew. This is one of our crews. Without them, we wouldn't be in business. We wouldn't be able to have the stories and the memories that we have and take people on their all over and show them. Between our packers and our mule crew, you can't have a good business without them. And without them, we thank you. Along with other things that Janice and I have done, some of the stuff that we were fortunate to do, we got to pack in a film crew. There used to be a program called Fishing the West, and nationwide we packed it into golden trout country up to Three Island Lake along with Daryl LaMonica. It was very interesting, packing $30,000 cameras at the time, you know, and hoping like hell that your mule didn't bucket off somewhere. And their sound equipment. We packed a lot of ice chests because it's surprising that we packed so many ice chests, but they found that was the easiest way to carry their equipment around through airports and everything else because it was that would withstand a lot of the damage, the freight, and the handling, and still be insulated and that. So it actually made it kind of easier to do that, but it was, you hurry up and wait and do this. And the director would say, we need to film here. After a while, we said, we need to stop here. I'd say, no, we can't stop here. We got to get to camp. We still got 15 miles to go. We got to get there before dark. It took a while before I finally figured out what he was looking for, so we would tell him and say, okay, up the trail. Just up the trail, there's a better spot. Up the trail, there's a better spot. So we didn't make it to camp before dark, but anyway. That was interesting. Then there was a film crew that came out of England to film an artist that was doing some paintings in Evolution Valley that were just absolutely gorgeous, but I looked all over and I could not find the name of the artist. I don't know who it was. I found a couple of pictures of his picture that he was doing, but it was very interesting dealing with them because the time frame between day and night and the hours from England to here trying to make contact to set the trip up and get everything worked out. It was a little, logistics were a little hard at times. Trying to think, is there anything?
This is the last photo.
Yeah, I know. That's cool. I'm asking if anybody wants a question. We got 10 minutes or so. Yes.
During my youth, you spent some time with Glenn Burns' pack station at Huntington and also at Mona. Did Cunningham's wind up with all Glenn's?
Well, no. It's kind of confusing. Glenn had a pack station at Huntington, and then he also had a camp. Eventually, he had a camp at Camp 62. It was a fork in the road between Madison and Mona. He had a camp there. Then somewhere along the line, that switched hands somewhere. And I think it's very confusing. I've never been able to fully tie it down. I think Kasner's in it. It's Kasner's from Kasner's drugstore. He was involved with it a little bit, and then Stevens got it. And Stevens moved it to Mona. I think Stevens actually bought that part from Glenn and moved it to Mona. And then Glenn sold the rest of his outfit eventually to Ford. But he had he worked, Glenn, I think, gave his actual pack station up. And he worked through Floyd Flight at D&F, because he had a trip that they called the Wamper trip. It was a traveling trip, kind of like a Sierra Club, only it was a private party program named Wamper. And I think he worked through Floyd's permit for years taking that trip. I've tried to find the paperwork on who bought what, when, and there, and that's some of the stuff at Fresno State that I wasn't able to find when they closed down.
Cunningham didn't wind up with any of that.
Well, no. I think our permit, I think the Stevenson permit was part of it. I think Lynn sold part of it to Bill Stevenson. Dad and them worked for Bill Stevenson for 2 years, and then they bought it. Because Stevenson moved the pack station from 62, Camp 62 down to Mona, and that's the station that Dad and Uncle Shorty bought. So it's right in that mid 40s, and that is there's some confusing. I couldn't find paperwork on it, and there was nobody to talk to that really remembered him.
The paperwork that we did find at one Forest Service permit, Glenn and Bud shared pastures.
Yeah, there were some shared pastures and one thing.
They were both things
So,
on.
and some spike camps, there was some
And
shared
that's where
stuff.
the confusion would come up, because they would, but you might have gone there.
Yeah, well, Glenn had a store, didn't he, right there?
There was a store there, that was part of the Kasner outfit. There was another man involved also. There was a store, and then they started putting a lunch counter in for a while, and there was a big dispute over the lunch counter, who was supposed to be paying permit fees on that.
Biggest rattlesnake I've ever seen in my life was right behind that store.
Was it? There's still, if you go to the site there, there's still, you go back in there and there's still, you can find, there's a couple trees with some hinges still hanging on it from the gate, some of the gates from the corrals, and there's a little pile between two rocks where the hay wire is stuck in there where it was done up and thrown in between two rocks and a pile. So you can still find some. And then across the road there was a pasture. A pasture, there's still some of the fence in that is still there. You can look around. I haven't found much more than that though. Yeah.
John, were you involved in the helicopter that went down there to pick Shovel Mine? Was that one of the two that you were talking about earlier?
Which one?
The helicopter that went down to Pick and Shovel Mine by Grassy Lake? Greg Marks was
No.
on that, if you remember.
No. That was a search and rescue, Forest Service and.
So you weren't thinking
No,
about
we had not. By then, most of the search and rescue stuff, by that time, we had pretty well gotten out of it because the helicopters had gotten good enough that they could handle higher elevations and flying at higher elevations. And honestly, I'm glad we did it. Because just because of the picture that I showed coming over Goodale Pass, tapping that fella out. And the other thing is search and rescue is terrible. You go rescue somebody in the dark. They're the most ungrateful people I've ever seen. It's true. When somebody hurts your leg or something, they call and they need a packer to come pick them up, so you go. I rode from Medicine Lake to Florence Lake to pick a guy up. Broke his ankle, got him out. Of course, nobody has any money then because you don't carry them. Now nobody's really got credit cards like that. Tapped him out and never sent me. Never paid. Never paid. Didn't know who I was when I called. I'm glad Forest Service and Sheriff Department all that. It's not to be ungrateful, just I don't mind helping the people when I do it. Just any of that. Anybody else?
There's a horse trail station over by Fish Camp. Was it ever an active pack station? I think it's on Jackson Road off of 41 in the Fish Camp area.
Fish Camp, that's a Mike Knapp's outfit. Yosemite Trail. They're still there.
Okay, and was it actually an actual pack station before? I think now they just do trail license.
Yes, it was a pack station for years, and then because of the trails and the Wilderness Act and changed boundaries around and one thing, and just the geographics of the area, it got to where it wasn't feasible to pack. I think they do more rides, and in the wintertime, I think they do sleigh rides. Along with they also race the good quarter horses and so on.